Welcome into Texans Today, and we have some breaking news for you on a Thursday morning. Mike Garafolo, Texans defensive tackle Tim Settle Jr. is slated to undergo foot surgery that will sideline him for the rest of the season. Sources say part of a veteran front that's been playing very well as of late and a free agent in the spring. Settle should be recovered well ahead of the 2026 season. Now, sad news here for Tim Settle. Sad news for this Texans organization because he was playing great. He was part of a fantastic defensive line for this Texans team. So go down in the comments section, spam those 98s for our guy Tim Settle. And, it sucks. I wish he'd be able to finish off this season. He's part of a great defensive line. And I know the Texans will be good. I know they'll be okay because there's a lot of depth at this position, right? And Tim Settle, he was a big part of it. He was one of the guys that rotated in, a de facto starter at defensive tackle along with Mario Edwards Jr. and Sheldon Rankins, the rest of these guys. But, Tim Settle Jr. was having a fantastic year, will now miss the remainder of this season. And as you saw from that tweet, will be a free agent this offseason, looking to be healthy for next year. Now, guys who needs to step up, obviously, Sheldon Rankins. He's had a pretty decent year, was with the Texans in Denico Ryan's first year, then signed a deal with Cincinnati. Didn't really work out there, had some health issues, came back and wanted to sign and play with the Houston Texans. He has been playing decently, and he will now have to step up even more now with Tim Settle out for the remainder of the year. Another guy who signed an extension earlier in the year, which surprised a lot of people, but he's been playing up to it. Tommy Togai has looked awesome, and expect for his reps to go up just a little bit as, all these guys, like I said, all kind of de facto starters. Denico Ryan's love to rotate in those defensive tackles, keep them really fresh. But now everybody's workload is just going to have to go just a little bit up, including guys like Tommy Togai and Mario Edwards Jr. had a couple big plays up against the Indianapolis Colts this past week. He's looked good as well this season. Another guy who the Texans signed on this past offseason to bring him back to Houston. I thought he's been a really good player for this Texans defense and this defensive front. One guy, though, because when we're thinking of Tim Settle and you think of defensive tackles, there's two really positions at the defensive tackle. There's nose tackle, guys who can play over the center, head up, the bigger, beefier guys. And then there's guys kind of like a Mario Edwards Jr. or Sheldon Rankins who are more of a 3 technique, which is in football lingo, more lining up over the guard, tackle, like between those two guys rather than right over the center. Usually want like big, hefty guys, really big, strong, dense guys to be that nose tackle. Edwards Jr., Sheldon Rankins, they're not as much that. Tommy Togai's a little bit more like that. He's really compact. Foley Futakasi is somebody who can play that nose tackle spot. He's been on IR since, I believe, week 4, whenever he sustained a shoulder injury. He was dealing with it during the offseason. But Foley Futakasi, his return is going to be one that I'm going to be looking at very, very closely because I want to see whether or not, he's going to be able to take up those reps from a Tim Settle Jr. now that he's going to miss the remainder of the season. I think the Texans will be okay, but it would really help if a guy like Foley Futakasi would be able to come back and kind of step into that role so we can keep that defensive line rotation pretty good going into the final weeks of the season and hopefully the playoffs. Coming up next, more Texans injury news. Is another starter out against the Chiefs? We already are missing Tim Settle Jr., one of the starters along the defensive line. Can we see another guy out? Maybe in Kamari, Lassiter. I'll talk about that here in just a moment, but couldn't do today's show if it wasn't for our amazing sponsors over at Prize Picks. Get started today with America's #1 fantasy sports app out there and join the millions of users who've already signed up. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's the holiday season, best time of year for sports, bowl games, basketball matchups, playoff pushes. It's all happening at once. And while you and I are out here making decisions every day, what gifts to buy, what to eat, which games to watch, there's one place where it feels good to be right. That is Prize Picks. Is your fantasy football season already over? My team, yeah, it's cooked. But with Prize Picks, I don't have to wait until next year's draft. Prize Picks lets you play fantasy football every week, pick your favorite players, and when they win and hit their projections every week, you win. No draft required. This is my lineup going into this Sunday, though. I'm using another new feature called Stacks. You can choose one player, multiple projections up to 3. I'm going Jaden Higgins, more receiving yards and more on the rushing receiving touchdowns. Patrick Mahomes, I'm going less on his passing yards. And then Will Anderson Jr., I'm going more on the sacks. You can use my lineup or go make your own. Just do it over with our friends at Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Now, another major injury that should, worry Texans fan just a little bit is Kamari Lassiter. He's been out all week dealing with a foot injury. Did not practice yesterday. Did not practice today. But I was told by sources close to the team, sources who are, around NRG, that the belief is he'll be good to go on Sunday. Denico said, Kamari Lassiter, Will Anderson Jr., Trent Brown, those guys should be good to go this Sunday, even though they're dealing with injury. But, 2 practices in a row out. I'd like to see him at least out there Friday limited if he wants to play this Sunday up against the Kansas City Chiefs. He's a big part of this defense. The secondary depth is already in question. Jalen Reed, one of the starters for this team after MJ Stewart went out, he's going to more than likely miss this week as well. So if you can't be without multiple starters on the back end in the secondary, that will be bad news for this Texans defense if that is the case. Another guy who's been dealing with injuries for the past couple of weeks, but he was back out there at practice today, Will Anderson Jr. He's been dealing with chest and shoulder pain, something that they've just kind of managed throughout the year. And he's not a veteran per se, but one of the leaders on this team. So you 1,000% want to play it more on the safe side with a guy like Will Anderson Jr. to kind of ease him back into each game day. You don't want to overdo it with Will Anderson Jr. and make sure that he is as close to 100% as humanly possible going into this Sunday's matchup against Kansas City. Another guy who is on the injury report, Azeez Al-Shire. He was limited with a knee injury, and he sustained an injury up against the Colts in the latter half of that game. Was tested for, concussion protocol, was able to return back to that game. But somebody that, the leader of this Texans defense, he's kind of the captain of the defense, wears the green dot, is the guy that's communicating with the coaching staff on the sidelines. He's a very important part of this Texans defense. So we'll need to see Agent Zero, Azeez Al-Shire, out there for this Texans defense. And another guy who I'll be looking at closely on this injury report. Another guy who's been dealing, older guy, Denico Autry. He's dealing with the knee injury, but that's just something that he's dealt with the entire season. Every single week you're going to see Denico Autry on the injury report. And like I said, a veteran, an older player who they want to, make sure that he's good to go when the time comes, whenever, big games late in the year, playoffs, hopefully, they're going to want Denico Autry out there. So you'll see him on the injury report just to play it on the safe side with an older player. Another guy, let's go to the offensive side, Woody Marks. He was back at practice today dealing with a foot injury. Has, had a couple really good games this season, and against the Colts, left in the early stages of that game with a foot injury, was able to come back, and I'm not surprised that he was back out there at the practice field, because this is what he had to say right after the game against the Colts on his injury status. He said, out for the game? Oh no. I ain't never out for the game. No matter what the situation is, I ain't ever out. So, straight from Woody Marks, you heard it right there. If he's any chance of going, he's going to be out there ready to play, and I was not surprised that he was back out there on the practice field this week getting ready for Kansas City. Another guy who's been dealing with a lingering injury, Trent Brown, reportedly has been playing with a broken finger for the past couple of weeks, really toughing it out. He has been a major part of this Texans team, and, this offensive line getting to a spot where they're playing pretty decently now moving forward. He went to the right tackle spot. They obviously moved right tackle Titus Howard to left guard. So he's a big part of the Texans offensive line moving forward. Playing with a broken finger, obviously that's something that you can manage, something that you can play with as a offensive tackle, offensive lineman, but just something to monitor as we move forward throughout the final weeks of the regular season. And then 2 guys likely out up against Kansas City. Jamal Hill, he's been dealing with a hamstring injury, so I imagine it doesn't look like he's ready to go just yet. He'll be out. And then Jalen Reed, he broke a metal plate in his forearm up against the Indianapolis Colts from a previous surgery that he had. Apparently, from closest source to Jalen Reed, sounds like he's in good spirits, and it sounds like he'll be able to come back at some point during this season. But 2 guys that will be out week 14 up against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, here is the AFC playoff picture heading into this game, and like I've told you throughout the entire week, this is a massive game for your Houston Texans. sitting at 7-5. They are one game out of a wild card spot, and they are still chasing this AFC South title. A win up against Kansas City will also not eliminate the Chiefs, but it'll make it extremely difficult for them to make the playoffs in the year 2025. So this Sunday, I will be live. Texans up against the Chiefs, Week 14, Sunday Night Football, 7:20 p.m. Central Time. I'll be live at 6:30, about almost an hour before game time. So make sure you tune in. Make sure you're there as we get ready to cheer on the Houston Texans, hopefully to a dub against the Kansas City Chiefs.